label and what it would mention on the duration? And so can you help us understand what we ought to be looking for? Is there going to be explicit mention of the label, or is it more indirect where there is a contraindication for less than 24 weeks use or something along those lines? Thank you.
Yeah, Balaji, great question. So first on the HintMD side of it, we've previously talked about sort of the overall credit card transaction processing charge, and that of that we would expect to participate in 50 to 100 basis points. So if you go to the low end of that, you're talking $500,000 in payment processing revenue between the beginning of the year and where we are today. So actually that $200,000 in Q3 lines up pretty well with sort of the transaction processing side of things. Toby, do you want to?
Yeah, and just to note that $100 million is cumulative for the year 2020, and the revenue number is in Q3 post-Hint acquisition close, which was closed the 23rd of July 2020.
Got it.
Yeah. So that's very much in line, and we continue to feel good about that. As we've talked before too, I think how we allocate ultimately that revenue stream, whether we choose to figure out partnering ways, that could evolve over time, but we continue to feel very good with sort of the revenue that we're generating from the payment value that's being generated. Your question about the label, I think that falls in the category of, it's just not appropriate for us to be commenting on kind of discussions with the agency. However, I will refer you back to prior commentary that we had. If you look at the quality of our SAKURA 1 and 2 programs, the largest ever in glabellar lines, labels, feedback that we've had, we continue to feel very good about the data from our trials being reflected in the label. So that's other than sort of the inspection update, we're going to kind of follow our typical policy in terms of not commenting on active discussions with the agency.
That's helpful, Mark. I can understand that. Just one follow up on plantar fasciitis. So with regard to migraine, are there any direct or indirect read-throughs from the plantar fasciitis studies towards how you develop the chronic migraine program when you think of starting it next year? Thanks.
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Balaji, and of course that's one of the things that we looked at, in terms of, the phase 2 results in plantar fasciitis. Are there any read-throughs into the other programs? Again, I think that the underlying physiology of plantar fasciitis is very different. It's a fascial disease. It's secondary to injury. It's not all that well understood. We certainly looked at, some of the data that had been published, talked to some clinicians as to why we thought it could be a good treatment opportunity. But it is very different from currently approved indications in muscle movement and pain disorders. And so we don't think it in any way impacts the way that we view the existing opportunities, or frankly, our ability to have a differentiated and sort of opportunity in those markets where a longer duration product would have value. So has it changed the way that we think about migraine? And again, it continues to be not an if, a when strategy. Clearly with where we are with CD and the data that we have coming out in ULS, that phase 2 data in Q1, that will help inform sort of our go-to-market strategy on those. And then, kind of when we layer in the start of these other clinical programs, we'll get more clarity as we start to firm those up.
Thank you.
Great, thanks.
Your next question comes from the line of Doug Tsao with H.C. Wainwright.
Hey, how you doing? Chris Bialis on for Doug today. So I was wondering if there's a delay in the DAXI BLA, how could this impact the commercial plans for the filler line or HintMD? I remember you guys mentioning that you were going to co-promote all three. And what plans or what contingencies do you have in the event of a potential delay to mitigate this? Thanks.
So great question. Unfortunately, we've already been through this once with sort of the delay in the launch of the RHA filler line due to COVID already. There's always going to be puts and takes when there's something that impacts it. So again, I want to restate, we don't know whether or not there will be a delay. We're still hopeful that there will be an inspection before our PDUFA date. But if there is, what we've talked about is first and foremost, we're in an incredibly strong cash position. So we've got, almost $450 million as of the end of Q3. We feel, really good about sort of our ability to execute on the launch. So that's kind of number one. Number two, when we talked about sort of the launch plan for our neuromodulator, we talked about Q1 being sort of a limited with a small group to inform kind of, optimal approach, Q2 being sort of the preview launch of 100 injectors, and then Q3 being a launch similar to what we're going through right now with the RHA fillers. And so if we look at that time frame, obviously if there were to be a delay, we'd be looking at ways to see whether or not we can compress any of that, and if there are ways to minimize any kind of impact. However, it does help to be in the market with two great products with the RHA fillers and the Hint MD. And while certainly the three together will add additional leverage from a bundling perspective, if anything, it allows us a little bit more focus right now on both these products in the early stages of their launch, where we can make sure that we get the necessary traction and focus and adoption of these platforms. I don't think that adding our neuromodulator in any way sort of changes that and really becomes additive over time. So we wish we had more clarity on this. We're ready, like I said, whenever they show up for the inspection, and we've got we think a really good opportunity to mitigate any impact because of our dollars, because of our in-market assets, and sort of our current launch strategy.
Thank you very much.
Great, thank you.
And you have no further questions at this time. I will now turn the call back over to Mr. Mark Foley.
Great, thank you, operator. Before year end, we plan to virtually attend the Credit Suisse, Stifel, and Piper Sandler healthcare conferences. We welcome your requests for meetings at these events or directly through us. Feel free to reach out to Jeannie if you'd like to schedule some time. With that, I would like to thank you all for participating in today's call.